not organic. Government doesn't just exist. Government doesn't have a head, and it doesn't have a heart. It has to be created. How is it created? Well, it's created simply by the rights and liberties that we, the people, possess when we collectively combine it and hand it over to the civil authorities for the greater good. That's what's called the consent of the governed, because that government cannot exist unless we hand them those liberties and freedoms for them to have proper authority. There's a quote that says that government has neither reason nor eloquence, it's force. And force, like fire, is a fearful servant and a dangerous master. And we need to understand that government can be a very dangerous master if it's not in proper order. What's the very first type of governance? The very first type of governance is self-governance. How do people become motivated to govern themselves? Well, generally throughout history, what you see is those who govern themselves, they are a moral and religious people because they have an internal compass. Our founders put together a very decentralized government, a lot of checks and balances. See, there's a balance and a tension between self-governance and the strength of the civil government. There's really only two axes going on, this tension in terms of every governmental structure in the history of man. And on one axis, you have self-governance. And depending on how low or how high the self-governance is, it impacts the type of government structure you see. And conversely, on the other axis, you have the strength of the civil government. And depending on how strong or how weak that government is, you have another types of government structure. What's interesting to note is when you have high levels of government oppression, that is what's called tyranny. And when you have the ultimate level of absolute zero self-governance in an amoral society, that is what's called anarchy. And depending on the tension of where you are, when both of those come together and collide, that is where you have the absolute worst case scenario, because that is where you have slavery. It doesn't mean that those people are devoid of any internal moral compass to govern themselves. What it means is they have allowed tyranny to become so established within their society that they literally have zero freedom remaining. James Madison, who's known as the father of our Constitution, warned. He said, you should take alarm at the first experiment of your liberties. The danger is that in our government right now, we are seeing high levels of tyranny. And by that, there's a huge difference between authority and power. And raw tyrannical power that does not align with the consent of the governed is tyranny. When the people fear the government, that is tyranny. But when the government fears the people, that is liberty. The more you have self-governance, the less civil government you need to have, because the people govern themselves. It is time for us to awaken and arise.